When did we go from being casual fans to fan club members to stans of artists? When did fan clubs turn into full fandoms and become such a big part of fans' identities? How has the internet accelerated that as well as other trends? How did we become such passionate fan bases? And for better and for worse, how are we showing our true selves or changing our true selves in the process of being and staying fans and recruiting other people into the fandoms? How do we want these fandoms to be remembered? Are we less likely to leave our fandoms now that we're spending more time invested in them every day? Or is that extra time having the opposite effect, causing fatigue, a saturation, and an exposure to the dark underbelly of certain fandoms and the members that have bad intentions? How do we reconcile the fans that do terrible things within our own fandoms with the ability to still continue supporting our favorites while still not excusing their behavior? What are the ethics of fandoms these days? How do we even know what those look like? What do fans do to get compensated for the free publicity they give their favorite stars? And really, ultimately, what does it mean to be a fan? What is fandom culture? And what is the history of it? Who gravitates toward what artists and why? Why are certain fandoms considered mainstream while others are cast aside and dismissed as insignificant or just worth belittling overall? How are fans around the world interacting and connecting with each other through their shared interests? And who is excluded or included from these fandom groups and interests? Who is encouraged to join and who is excluded from doing so? All of these questions and more are what I want to get at in this new mini-series, How to Stan. If you subscribe to 17 Karat K-Pop, you will get these mini-series episodes as they are released regularly over the next few weeks, where I will be unpacking what it means to be a fan, what it has meant in the past, and what it might mean going forward in the future. If you want to get more information about the show and the references made in it, I will be having links revealed on the 17 Karat K-Pop website as well as through the newsletter. Visit 17karatkpop.weebly.com for more information about that. Thank you and enjoy the show. Welcome back to How to Stan. This is episode 5, Sherlockians. In 1887, the world was introduced to Sherlock Holmes for the first time, the worldwide famous detective that now captures the world's attention even centuries later. It wasn't until 1891, 4 years later, that fans suddenly formed for Sherlock Holmes, after a set of 6 short stories featuring Holmes were printed in a magazine. And since then, suddenly the world took notice, and fans began to love reading Sherlock Holmes books, watching the movies and shows, and interpreting it as they saw fit. There have been a total of 60 main Sherlock works that are considered part of his literary canon officially, 4 novels and 56 short stories that fans have reinterpreted time and time and time again. In fact, the Guinness Book of World Records actually gave this award to Sherlock Holmes in 2012 for the most portrayed literary character in TV and film history, with over 25,000 adaptations, and that was just by the 1990s. It's been more since then, and over 75 actors playing the role of Holmes. Over time, there's been CBS's Elementary Show, BBC's Sherlock, Finland's Sherlock North, even the Japanese anime series Sherlock Hound, which featured dogs in the roles of Holmes and Watson. Over time, Sherlock has continued to be reinvented for the big and the small screens, as well as taken on the role of statues, street names. Even a London train was named after Holmes in the 1920s. There's a Sherlock Holmes museum, as well as a dedicated Holmes exhibit in a separate museum. Sherlock has been reinterpreted as theater productions. Fans have made their own radio shows about it, as well as phonograph recording radio shows. This is fandom has created such an eclectic mix of fan art, in a sense, in different forms over time, and he's continued to just be this eternally relevant character. Fan letters also have continued to be sent to 221 Baker Street, which is where Watson and Holmes live together in the stories. Although this address doesn't really exist, that building is part of a bigger building on that street. So those letters do get redirected to the Sherlock Holmes Museum now, but fans continue to send them again and again and again. And really, why is this? It may sound very strange. It may not sound like he's just a detective working with Watson to solve crimes. What is it about him that is so alluring for so many for so long? Well, it really has a lot to do with the mystery surrounding Holmes. And I'm not just talking about the mystery in terms of his actual stories being literally mystery stories, but the mystery surrounding the character because the author left a lot of gaps in the narrative. Sherlock as a character, his backstory is quite murky, his family history is murky, he doesn't really talk about his parents much. Also, his birthday and age are kind of debated. Fans are pretty sure it's January 6th, but his birthday and official age of the character have never been confirmed. There are just all sorts of other mysteries too, as to how characters like Watson got injuries. There are debates as to the relationship between Holmes and Watson and if they were more than just friends. That's one interpretation. There are even some who think that Holmes was secretly American and not British. There are many strong opinions reinterpreting the work of Sherlock Holmes, and so that is part of the reason why Holmes continues to be talked about and reinvented, because the author left room for that to happen, left all those ambiguities in the story. Part of that feeds into a main driver of Holmes continuing to be in the conversation, which is the group of fans who believe that Holmes was a real person. And Sherlock Holmes as a character is just putting on a face. Really, this was a real person, a real historical figure, as was Watson, and these were nonfiction stories, and all of the details that were unspoken just couldn't be for security reasons, or because the author of these books, Conan Doyle, wanted to leave fans enough of a foundation to solve the mysteries and get them started, but not fully close those mysteries. So basically, fans reject Conan Doyle's assertion that he created the character after getting inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's mysteries, as well as someone he knew in his personal life, a mentor, this surgeon Joseph Bell, saying that he admired Joseph Bell so much and it was a positive impact on his life to work for him that he created the character after him. But fans then latch on to things that they cite as evidence for the contrary. For example, a letter went public that Joseph Bell wrote to Doyle saying, quote, "You are yourself Sherlock Holmes, and well you know it." And so fans debate if the author is Holmes or just a lawyer of sorts, serving as a voice for Holmes to protect Holmes's true identity. There are a lot of interpretations here, and that is part of the continuous appeal of this never-ending story, truly. So, with all of this mystery, how do fans try to assert their position more officially? Well, they do it through the debates they have, through their fan club presence. There are two main things that these fan clubs do. They have publications where they argue for their side of what they think happened, and they have actual physical get-togethers where, especially the yearly one in New York City on January 6th, Holmes's alleged birthday, where they debate the storyline, and they try to argue why they think the story should be interpreted in a certain way or not. And these events are very telling for divides within the fandom in terms of old and new fans and their demographic traits, as well as just in general how Sherlock Holmes' story has been taking on. The popular interpretation of Holmes' story has changed with the times, again allowing for that eternal relevancy. Quick backstory to understand the Holmes story before we get into the fans' actual get-togethers and what those are like. So, Holmes doesn't talk about his parents, like I said, but he does mention an older brother named Mycroft, who is very data-focused. So Mycroft is cited as quite intelligent, but stays behind the scenes and prefers to just work behind a computer, or at the time, whatever else it would have been in the 1800s, and he controls data. And he doesn't do what Holmes prefers, which is the actual out there in the physical world detective work. The actual investigative on-the-ground work is what Holmes loves to do, and that's what he is very well known for in his stories, is taking on the physical appearance or wearing an outfit similar to the suspects he's following and trying to embody them as much as possible and really, really get into the thick of the mysteries. So that is the main divide between those characters. Holmes and Watson rely on each other a lot in many ways. One is financially, so they started living together on Baker Street due to hitting hard financial times, and they've lived there ever since in the storyline. Also, Watson is cited with constantly helping Holmes wean off of his drug habits. Also, Watson is considered the narrator of every story for them, although Holmes constantly implies that Watson is an unreliable narrator, which adds to fans' ability to have different interpretations about what really happened. Watson is constantly viewed as distorting the facts or just not remembering the full picture of what happened, which can have a huge impact on the whole story. And so this continues to be a main attraction to the stories, is these interesting, very interpretable, up to interpretation, dynamics between Holmes and Watson. The story all ends where Holmes has retired and he serves as a beekeeper in a Sussex Downs location where he lives on a farm. However, even stories were even continued to be written after that, again because the fan demand was there for them. And those stories always involve Watson and Holmes suddenly jumping out of retirement for a minute to go solve a dire situation, a dire mystery that needs help. Who are the Sherlock fans and what are their gatherings like? We will talk about that after the break. The first official Sherlock Holmes fan club was started in 1934 by this author and journalist named Christopher Morley, and it started out really from the get-go wanting to be called a literary society. They actually reject the term fandom. I use that term here for the sake of the show's context, and really, essentially, they are a fandom, but they don't like that label. They prefer to view themselves as these literary scholars, and so that's really what the first fandom was. It was about an elitist book club, in a sense. So this first fan club for Sherlock Holmes was called the Baker Street Irregulars. They got that name from characters in the Holmes story who, the irregulars in the story are the ones who serve as these agents, these intelligence agents that work for the government on behalf of Holmes. And so they took on that moniker, along with Baker Street, the name of the street Holmes and Watson live on in the stories. And they basically, from the get-go, were incredibly, incredibly exclusive. So to get into the Baker Street Irregulars, you have to be invited. And you also have to pass a test. So the first test, actually, the first year of this event was just solving a crossword puzzle that was created by Morley himself. And after that year, the criteria to be considered eligible for this is up in the air. They've never disclosed how they decide who gets in and who doesn't into this society, but clearly there is a very elitist mentality in this group. Women weren't even welcome at first, and not until 1991 were women finally allowed in, and by then, female Sherlock fans had started their own fan clubs like the Adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes and other offshoots. How many people are in this fandom is very small compared to the Sherlock Holmes amount of fans around the world, but is still relatively big. The estimates are around 700, but it's never really been publicly confirmed by this secretive group how many members they've taken in, and if you're a member for life, if there's a renewal process. There are so many mysteries surrounding this group and what they do. But what is public knowledge are two main categories of activities. So the first thing they do is they write for and read and get to subscribe to the Baker Street Journal, which is their publication they've started, and since 1946 they have been writing for reinterpretations of Holmes stories, new Holmes stories, all of it. Everything Sherlock Holmes that you would want to read is in the Baker Street Journal, which is a quarterly print newspaper. It is a nonprofit publication for people who want to live, quote, in a world where it is always 1895. The second thing they do is they have actual physical meetups. One of those is every year on January 6th, which is what they think is Holmes's birthday, although it's not official yet, hasn't been ever confirmed. But they always meet up in New York City on January 6th every year to celebrate Holmes's birthday, talk about the story, and share trivia, because the loser of trivia has to buy everyone else drinks. So they have a lot of gentlemen's club-esque gatherings, and always have. The main thing that they are known for, if you're part of the Baker Street Irregulars, is this mentality of the game. So in capital letters, the game, otherwise known as the Grand Game, sometimes called the Great Game. This has been around since 1911, started by what many think was Richard Knox, who started it by bringing it up in a lecture, but there's a little bit of a debate about who should actually get credit for starting this. But it did start in 1911, and ever since then, these members of the Baker Street Irregulars have played the game, where they basically believe that Holmes and Watson are real, and have always been real, and they act accordingly. So they view themselves as filling the narrative gaps that Holmes left for them to fill, and finishing solving the mysteries that are still unsolved, and basically continuously they have been hired and tasked with adding evidence to their interpretation of the Holmes universe. So that's what they do by treating Holmes and Watson as historical figures, and they report their findings to the head of their organization known as Wiggins. Only known as Wiggins, no real transparency about who that is. Obviously, I've never been to their club meetings, so I don't know what Wiggins is, but that is the person or thing that they report their findings to. So how do they explain the author Conan Doyle and how Conan Doyle insists that this is a fictional character? Well, they actually think that's an alibi. And Conan Doyle is really Watson's agent, an agent used to help Watson. He's really another vessel for some truths to come out, but they can't, again, fill in all those gaps, and so they need your help being able to expose the full truth of this universe and what it has uncovered. There is a sociology study by Michael Saylor that really talks about the game as a part of the absence effect. And the absence effect, as he describes it, is basically a sociology concept about when a narrative is not full and there is room for interpretation. Fans basically view it as their obligation to finish the story that they have become invested in, and so they become more and more invested in and determined to close those loops. And that's what the absence effect is all about. For the absence effect to really be taken advantage of, Saylor argues that it requires a keen eye for story details, key recollections, good memory for the story, and lots of time and dedication. So if you can prove you can help embody what the absence effect is trying to correct, you're welcome to play the game. Sherlock fans are the epitome of what the absence effect utilizes, where it's that concept of how people get swept up in a literary fandom is through the ability to become authors of the piece that they fell in love with. So they're taking more agency in the storyline. If they don't like a certain interpretation, they make up their own, or they reinterpret things as they see fit. In addition to exclusivity surrounding who's welcome into the Baker Street Irregulars and other fandoms, there are also two clear divides in Sherlock fandoms based on other traits. So first of all, there is quite a divide between Sherlock fans that are older and newer. The older fans prefer to basically talk about Sherlock Holmes through the print publication, like the Baker Street Journal, and do things the old-fashioned way, writing fan letters and having those meetups, and really it's all in person or through writing. Whereas the younger, newer Sherlock fans prefer to have this online discourse, and that becomes quite a separate thing. So there's clearly a divide between how they play the game, because they don't play the game together at all, really. It's like they're playing separate games in a way. The second way that there is a key divide continues to be the sense that female fans never really got over their sense of being shunned from the main fandom. So they've created their offshoot that has really continued to be more and more outside of the mainstream views of Sherlock Holmes interpretations. They take on the interpretations more and more that are not considered acceptable for the traditional fandom. Over time, the Sherlock Holmes fandom really went from being primarily healthier older men talking together and getting together to a much more diverse fandom in terms of age and gender. And so a lot of the younger Sherlock fans are actually female, and a lot of them identify as LGBTQIA+, and so they've kind of created their own online communities where they still talk about Sherlock Holmes and still play the game in a way, but they do so in a way that is just very, very different, that they consider to be unacceptable to the Baker Street Irregulars. So the Baker Street Journal has kind of tried to be more inclusive over time. They're under new leadership. They really tried to, and there was a change in that, but there continued to be resistance to things like using gender-neutral pronouns in publications. So really, that has just continued to perpetuate this divide between the young and old fans and the ways that they engage with the Holmes material. There's also this offshoot of the main group that is unaffiliated with them called the Retired Beekeepers, a little wink and a nod to Sherlock Holmes's retirement life as a beekeeper. The Retired Beekeepers call themselves, quote, an all-inclusive LGBTQ plus Sherlock Holmes enthusiast group, and they are primarily found on Tumblr. So this group, the Retired Beekeepers, is for fans who felt marginalized by the straight men who ran the traditional original group, and it encourages queer interpretations of Sherlock, where Sherlock and Watson probably were lovers helping each other through things. Unlike any other relationship Holmes ever had, Watson frequently talks in the books about how Holmes had no interest in women, and not only that, but kind of had an aversion to them. So they really rely on those quotes to justify their argument that they were more than friends, Sherlock and Watson, and they moved in together for more reasons than one. So they make this publication called the Practical Handbook of Bee Culture. It's a biannual journal that, quote, especially encourages anyone identifying as LGBTQ+ to submit pieces relating to their own experiences, as we feel that our voices rarely have the opportunity to be heard when it comes to Holmesian scholarship. So they basically decided, we do belong in the Sherlock fandom, and if you don't see that, then we're just going to do our own thing and prove it to you. And so that is essentially what they have been doing. Now, part of the reason why there is this divide is because the Baker Street Journal and the older male fans, that first wave of Sherlock Holmes fandom characteristics, continues to be so ingrained in the culture of the Baker Street Journal writings, and so they resist what they consider modern interpretations of Sherlock, that they view as going too against the grain. It's a weird irony between them constantly loving the fact that Sherlock is up to interpretation and them not liking the fact that it's being interpreted in ways they don't like. And so there's actually a very scathing op-ed of sorts written for an editor's column in the Baker Street Journal back in 1946, but it seems relevant still to the divide between the factions of the fandom to this day, where Edgar W. Smith wrote, quote, we have resisted every temptation to modernize the scene in Baker Street, or to give a super-duper streamlining to its characters and its characterizations. They don't like modern twists added to their traditional story. Again, the ultimate slogan of the Baker Street Journal is, living life like it's 1895 every day. In a separate piece, the same author said, quote, for it is not Sherlock Holmes who sits in Baker Street, comfortable, competent, and self-assured. It is we ourselves who are there, full of a tremendous capacity for wisdom, complacent in the presence of our humble Watson, conscious of a warm well-being and a timeless, imperishable content. The easy chair in the room is drawn up to the hearthstone of our very hearts. It is our tobacco in the Persian slipper, and our violin lying so carelessly across the knee. It is we who hear the pounding on the stairs and the knock upon the door. The swirling fog without and the acrid smoke within bite deep indeed, for we taste them even now. And the time and place and all the great events are near and dear to us, not because our memories call them forth in pure nostalgia, but because they are a part of us today. That is the Sherlock Holmes we love, the Holmes implicit and eternal in ourselves. So those types of comments are not uncommon. That level of feeling like Holmes and being a Holmesian, as some of them say, is a part of their identity. They feel so immersed in the story now, which goes back to what Michael Saylor, the sociologist, was saying, is that the absence effect is in full play here, being utilized for fans to feel like they're a part of something, and they're finding more of themselves in the traditional tellings of Holmes and his universe that they feel like they've been sucked into. And what that goes to show is that fans not only feel absorbed by this world, but they feel like anyone who questions their interpretation of their world is being very personally offensive to them, because they have grown so accustomed to the Sherlock world as they see themselves in it. And so when a different characterization running counter to them is at play, they get on the defensive because it's become like a home for them. And for that second home to be ruined is naturally a very distressing situation to be in. One interesting fact about the Holmes fans, though, that does remain no matter which faction you're looking at, is their passion for this. So a key example you will see in the Believe in Sherlock campaign, which is just one of many online campaigns that changed Sherlock Holmes and just revived it in the international conversation. So, the day after the final BBC episode of Sherlock aired, this was in January 2012, this Tumblr user who just went by Earl said, quote, "So, I guess you all have heard, read, seen the news. It's been pretty hard to miss it, the death of Sherlock Holmes. I'm gutted, but I'm doing my best to keep it together. I don't know about you guys, but I refuse to believe it, that he was a fraud. He just can't have. I saw him at a crime scene once. I had followed the sound of sirens and hoped it'd be one of his cases. There's no way he was a fake. You can't make that sort of stuff up. He was too good. He was an inspiration for all of us to be more observant in our everyday lives, and I won't accept the so-called truth about Sherlock that is all over the media. I know you feel like I do, and now it's our turn to show that we haven't lost faith in him. Sherlock might be gone, but I won't sit silent." So basically what that Tumblr post that went viral quickly afterwards was saying is taking on the classic trademark Sherlock fan irony sense of humor, dripping in all of its irony, and basically to the point where you wonder if they actually believe themselves or if they're just playing the game. And this Tumblr user seemed to be playing the game by basically treating the last episode of the Sherlock show as the death of Sherlock as a character, and talking about being gutted about that and how it's our duty to not let the media forget about him. So the hashtag Believe in Sherlock came out of this Tumblr post and went viral, as well as I Believe in Sherlock Holmes being a rallying cry for the fandom. Moriarty was real is also a quote that was Sherlock associated that went viral, and these were sort of the battle cries of sorts for the Sherlock fandom online. Believe in Sherlock and Moriarty was real. So insisting that they not let the media view this as just another fictional show that was canceled, but as a nonfiction story that deserves to be remembered. So this campaign resulted in everything from fan-made t-shirts that said Believe in Sherlock, to flyers being passed out with their message, to graffiti art saying things like hashtag Believe in Sherlock. And within 2 weeks of this campaign starting, it was already being talked about, not just online in fringe corners of the internet, but by the mainstream media in the UK within just 2 weeks. And then a Tumblr report later on revealed that campaign activity was buzzing everywhere from Canada to Brazil to India to Japan to Israel to South Africa. Fans all over the world were joining this Believe in Sherlock campaign to point out that Sherlock was real and deserves to be remembered, essentially. So there are a lot of questions you probably still have, like why was the fandom always so exclusive and very much thinking that they're the know-it-all? Why do they really believe that Sherlock is on the run, or was or still is in hiding, was a real person, or is this all part of their layers of irony that they have in their commentary and their writing, or is it all truly what they believe? I mean, there are so many questions here, but the main thing that I want to leave you with to think about, though, is the fact that maybe it doesn't matter. They have this fun, and it has continued to revive a timeless character, and there are much worse things to be obsessed with and to campaign about, and Sherlock Holmes being remembered in the public conversation is not one of them. As Michael Saylor said in that sociology report, he basically described the concept of an ironic imagination, which is what the Sherlock Holmes fans in every faction seem to embody. So regardless of their differences, what they ultimately all find so alluring and captivating about Holmes and the universe created by Doyle is the ironic imagination they get to practice. And the ironic imagination is basically, quote, adult readers seeking enchantment began to inhabit the imaginary worlds of fantastic fiction for extended periods of time without losing sight of the real world. So essentially what he's saying is that they are practicing the ironic imagination. They are trying to escape the world when it gets really stressful and just escape into a fictional world where part of them may know that it's fiction and part of them doesn't. They find a way to go back into the real world. And so, of course, there are probably exceptions of people who are so immersed in the Sherlock Holmes world that it does feel like they're not in the present world. And of course, everything in moderation is important. However, for the majority of Sherlock fans, it seems like their regular get-togethers and writings and conversations are just a part of their lives, a part of their social lives, and for the most part just fun campaigns that don't hurt anyone and just let them continue to bond over their fascination with this detective and his sidekick Watson and the life they live together. And so really it's their ironic imagination at play, allowing them to feel like as adults they still are able to make believe a little and play pretend, even if maybe their mind is playing tricks on them, but to what degree doesn't really matter here. It seems like for the most part, these fans really want to escape for a while, and they are able to do so by going back to 1895 or earlier. The bottom line is that these fans are finding a special purpose and hobby in engaging with the Holmes universe, and they continue to show that. They continue to come together to keep the conversation going. So there may be factions that never come together in the Holmes fandom, and generational waves may always have tension between them, but this Holmes is here to stay, and this fandom is here to stay. And so rather than view their interest as odd, I would just insist that they are using their ironic imagination and finding some escapism from their daily lives to go back to 1895, where they considered it to be a simpler time and where they can feel like they have more control and agency over what happens and what they want to happen. And whatever they don't want to happen, they can just pretend is not true. And so they get to engage in that fantasy world a bit. And so I say let them. That is today's topic. We're going to talk about more literary fandoms from different perspectives on other episodes, as well as other fandoms, as always. Quite a variety of fandoms I like to talk about on the show. So if you haven't already, the past few episodes have talked about Hello Kitty, Miku, holograms, kawaii culture and other cartoons, the bronies, the My Little Pony male fans. I could go on and on, but just stay tuned, and all to say I have a variety of content on this show coming still, lots of exciting fandoms to explore, so I hope this was interesting, and I will mix it up and not go right to another literary fandom for the next episode, so stay tuned. I'll keep it a secret, though, what I talk about next week, but just stay tuned for that. Thank you for listening to How to Stand. I'll see you later.